And I think that that's possible. We're seeing some of that happen now with real world data, with labeling expansion, some of the work that NEST is doing, and some of the early projects that are happening there. And I think that that's really promising. And what I want to encourage, our industry colleagues to think about is that's fantastic. And how do we do that earlier?
Yes.
Not just as a labeling expansion, but like, how do we think about, if I won't say the phrase if I had one wish, because I feel like there's so many. And by the time we have this conversation, but it's, it's like, how do we think about innovating for children first?
Right.
Is there how do we create the right incentives to do that and the right requirements to do that when appropriate in a meaningful way? And I think that that's one of the things that's lacking in this ecosystem and this industry.
Today on Bluestock Talk, we have Dr. Juan Espinoza. He is a pediatrician and one of the leading voices pushing pediatric medtech into the future. He is a Chief Research Informatics Officer at Lurie's Children's Hospital of Chicago, as well as the Director of CTIP, which is an FDA-funded pediatric device accelerator. He truly works at the intersection of medicine, technology, entrepreneurship, and big ideas. Dr. Espinoza, welcome to Bluestock Talk.
Oh, thank you for having me, Allison. I appreciate it.
I'm so happy to finally have you here, but also that I got to see you not too long ago. We were at the MDIC conference together, and I feel like you are my buddy that I get to hang out with at conferences and talk pediatrics. Like, it's always like, let's talk about children. And I also just follow everything that you post on LinkedIn and what you're working on, and I just want to start by saying thank you. You do a lot.
Oh, that's so very kind of you. I appreciate it. We're all, I think the pediatric space is almost by definition a collaborative one. And, there's so much to do that it's a big tent, right? Everybody who wants to work and contribute is welcome. And so, I think we, by default, are collaborative and approachable by nature, because this is important work.
Yes. Yeah. And I've never met somebody who says, I love children being sick. And I mean, most people really care about children and want kids to be healthy and want kids to have innovative technologies that will hopefully help them with whatever disease or condition they're dealing with. So
yeah. No, I think it's one of those things, like we, like innately as humans, a biological imperative is to care for children. Otherwise there would be no more humans. And so I think we all feel it on an individual level. I think where it gets complicated is how does that translate to societal priorities, to financial investments, to policy, in ways that are meaningful? Because you're right. I think most people that I talk to sort of have this mental model of, oh, well, children are our future, children matter. We must be investing in pediatric research. We must be investing in pediatric innovation. And the reality is very different.
Yeah.
What we know is that, we spend less than 10% of all healthcare dollars go to pediatric care. And that's not because children are healthier than adults. Anybody who's taken care of or has seen a child in a pediatric ICU or in a neonatal ICU knows that that is not the case. It's because we quite literally don't pay as much. Pediatric hospitals, pediatric providers, pediatric clinicians, pediatric drugs and devices, they get reimbursed or compensated less than the equivalent services in adults. And that's a historical and systemic pattern that persists to this day. So, and so you think about the fact that if we use 22, which is what CDRH uses as the cutoff for pediatrics, in the United States, people under the age of 22 is about a quarter of the U.S. population, but less than 10% of the dollars go to the healthcare of those people, right? And we see that that's true in healthcare, that's true in research. If you look at the NIH budget, across the NICHD and all of the other institutes combined, the total amount of funding that goes to pediatric research is a little bit less than 12%. So again, our future, our children, less than 10% of
the math doesn't.
The math isn't mathing.
Yeah.
And, I think there's lots of, I would say political and financial reasons for that. It's children primarily get their health care through Medicaid or through health plans that match to Medicaid, and that is in itself a problem. You have a very heterogeneous reimbursement landscape for pediatrics, right? For adults on Medicare, right, there are national coverage decisions. There are 56 Medicaid directors in the United States, and there are 56 coverage decisions to be made. And so you end up with this very, very different, which also is honestly is a struggle for industry, right? Yes. If we're talking about medtech, they're like, well, what's your reimbursement strategy for pediatrics? Like, we'll find out.
We'll figure it out.
We'll start having all of these conversations. It's not like they can point to CMS and say, yes, this is the Medicare coverage rate and this is what we can expect. It's going to be a piece by piece. In some places, pediatric hospitals might be reimbursed, DRG style payments. Sometimes it might be fee for service. Sometimes that state's Medicaid agrees that should be covered and maybe they don't. So you enter this space where there's, in addition to the scientific complexity, the engineering complexity, the appropriate ethical and concerns that we have to have in how we structure these studies and how we do these trials, and you manage to get through all those hurdles, and then you enter this financial market, the economic aspects of it that just add this what I call sort of insult to injury, right? Like you overcame these real and important hurdles, and now you have these hurdles that are essentially entirely man-made.
Right. Right. And I mean, your point of everyone assumes that, of course, we're taking care of kids. Of course, this must be funded and these things must be in place. But that's not the case, right? I feel like there's like everyone wants to do something or cares about this population, but there's just a lot of things that have gone sort of haywire, I think, over the years, or that people haven't, put a lot of attention into. So how do we fix it? There. Easy question.
Oh, well.
If you could just, how do we figure? I think one of the things that and how we originally met is based on the work that you've done with CTIP, right? And the Consortia. Yes. And so talk a little bit about that, because I think that's one of the ways that hopefully we start, fixing this problem that we have currently.
Yeah. And I'll start by saying that lots of very, very smart people, smarter than I, have been working on this problem for longer than I have. So anything I say should be considered as being sitting on the shoulders of giants, of lots of people who have worked really hard on this problem. But so there's lots of different ways to address this. I think one important way that began in 2007, so Congress passed an act that created funding to build the Pediatric Device Consortia program, the PDCs, which is a program that's run out of the FDA. And it's intended to use this kind of center of excellence model, right? How do we find organizations who have expertise in supporting early stage innovation with the ultimate goal of finding these pediatric projects and helping them to move forward, right? If we think of if we use the TPLC as our mental model, right?
Total how do you product life cycle. Yeah, exactly.
That's right. So how do you go from concept to commercialization, right? And along the stages, the PDCs are intended to identify early projects, identify how to best support them, and then help deliver that support either directly through our staff, through our funding, or through our networks and through our partnerships, being able to introduce innovators to clinicians, to researchers, to medtech partners, to strategic partners to help move that forward. So that program, created in 2007, first funded and instantiated in 2009. There have been now 5 cycles of that program. The current cycle is 2023 to 2028. There's 5 PDCs around the country. So it's UCSF Stanford, the Southwest PDC based out of Texas. There's the Alliance for Pediatric Device Innovation based out of DC and Children's National. There's the Midwest PDC based out of Nationwide Children's, and then CTIP, which is based out of Lurie Children's here in Chicago. We got our start in Southern California. we started out as a early collaboration between Children's Hospital Los Angeles and USC, and it was this internal grant to say, how can we collaborate together between the engineering school and the clinicians at CHLA to start to address some of these problems. And that laid the foundation for us to get our first FDA PDC grant in 2013. We were funded a second time in 2018, and now it's currently in 2023 has been our third PDC grant. And it's been an incredible journey. Like, I am grateful and humbled to the companies that we've had the opportunity to help, that they've kind of entrusted us to support them in their journey. We were pulling our data together, and we looked at 2013 to 2025. And in that period of time, we worked with about 300 unique projects. And it's, everything range, class 1, class 2, class 3, de novos, HDEs, PMAs.
Different ages too. I know I've worked with like neonatal to transitional adolescence, right? Like it's the whole gamut.
And it's, and I think what it sort of, what it emphasizes for me is that there's not any one area of pediatrics that is more underserved than other. It's it's everywhere. Whether it's preventative health care to, hospital-based care to specialty care, remote monitoring, therapeutics, diagnostics, oncology, diabetes, asthma, it's kind of everywhere. We don't have the tools we need. And so what we end up doing is a lot of off-label use, which is necessary and important. That's how we are able to take care of patients. But I think, fundamentally, I think we all understand that off-label use is its own form of a kind of a health inequity where children are being exposed to essentially an either unknown or uneven risk-benefit profile because we're using devices outside of how they were reviewed and approved and labeled based on their safety and efficacy data that was presented to the FDA. Again, critical and important. We are, quite literally, in some cases, saving lives through off-label use. But fundamentally, I think it's a thing that we need to struggle with and try to think, how might we address that? How do we get to the other side of making sure that, I think we would all agree that children deserve to have better risk safety profiles, to better understand the benefit, both children and their care teams together, to make better informed decisions in a way that's supported by the safety and efficacy data that's available. And I think that that's possible, and some of that, we're seeing some of that happen now with real world data, with labeling expansion, some of the work that NEST is doing, and some of the early projects that are happening there. And I think that that's really promising. And what I want to encourage, our industry colleagues to think about is that's fantastic. And how do we do that earlier?
Yes.
Not just as a labeling expansion, but like, how do we think about, if I won't say the phrase "if I had one wish" because I feel like there's so many. And
by the time we have this
conversation, but it's it's like, how do we think about innovating for children first?
Right.
What is there? How do we create the right incentives to do that and the right requirements to do that when appropriate in a meaningful way? And I think that that's one of the things that's lacking in this ecosystem and this industry. If we look to, our colleagues in the pharma side, we have PRIA and BPCA, which, are certainly not perfect, but certainly have given us a model of what that looks like, of creating incentives for pediatric innovation, as well as requirements for pediatric innovation and data generation and evidence generation. And without necessarily saying that we can copy paste those, because drugs and devices are very, very different, as we all know, and your listeners know. Yeah. But I think that framework of pairing those two pieces together is, I think, something that we can learn from and adapt for devices in a way that's meaningful to us, to our patients, to our clinicians, to our industry partners who help bring these technologies to market. So that's something that I think is going to be necessary to really meaningfully move this forward.
Yeah, I especially the earlier we can think about kids, the better, right? Like, it is one of the things I've told companies that are considering even any technology is let's talk about the pediatric piece, even if it's not something that they were even thinking about, because there have been some incentives from FDA. You know, I think about all of the pediatric submissions, pre-market submissions for CDRH are free. A lot of folks don't know that. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
so if you start, maybe get your de novo granted for a pediatric population and expand into an adult population from there. I think there's also, you know, folks at FDA that are hyper-focused on pediatric populations. Bring those people into the conversation. You can request that their presence be at, you know, your pre-sub meeting. But I feel like as you said, it's not just one part of the TPLC, right? If we're thinking about it in that way, that's going to move the needle. It has to be a lot of different players in this space having these meaningful conversations. What does that reimbursement look like? What are the, you know, the innovators thinking of, and making sure that these kids aren't left behind? You know, it really feels like that's, and I think the Consortia is one of the, you know, huge things. I was so excited when that was brought about, I know, by Vasum Paris, right? Or Dr. Paris at FDA, who was a huge player in that. And then just seeing that investment is so important. So
yes, you know, and Vasum during his time at FDA was such an incredible champion for pediatrics, supported the PDC program. The PDC program is run out of OOPD, the Office of Orphan Product Development, who also are incredible advocates for pediatrics across the spectrum of medical products. And you know, they've been not just our funders, but just wonderful partners in facilitating working across the agency. When the Center of Excellence for Digital Health first launched, you know, OOPD was like, great, come talk to the PDCs. You know, partnerships with OCEL, with OCEA, right? Like, so I think they've been wonderful as both our home and our champions. And then at CDRH, it's been nice to work with some of the different offices, as well as directly with the OHTs. For the companies that we support through CTIP, you know, we'll work with them on their regulatory strategy. We'll help advocate for them. I've attended more pre-sub meetings than I can count at this point in my life. And I think it's always nice, because I think, you know, everybody wants to do the right thing. And I think that's what's always helpful about being in this industry, being in healthcare. It's, there's a cynical take on everything, but in general, if you're in healthcare, you want people to live better, more fulfilling, longer, healthier lives. You know, full stop.
And I think that, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No. And no, I was just going to say, and so it's nice, you know, so everybody, right? Like the FDA reviewers, the industry sponsors, us as advocates, right? Like we all want the same thing, which is we want better devices that are safer or more effective for children on the market. And so the question is, the ways that we accomplish that goal might be a little bit different. We might all have the same information. We might have different concerns, different risk tolerances. And so it truly is this collaborative effort between all of the parties to get there.
Yeah. And so for the bringing things earlier, you brought up a couple centers of excellence at FDA and different ways that we've seen success, right? The Digital Health Center of Excellence. We have the Oncology Center of Excellence, which is mostly run on the drug side of things at FDA. I know you've pitched an idea of maybe a Pediatric Center of Excellence, and I like this idea. And so, you know, if there's anyone at FDA listening to this, I think this is brilliant. We really should have the folks that are thinking about peds all the time.
No, yes. And again, these are, Vasum has talked about this idea in the past. So I want to give him full credit for it. But it's something that he and I have continued to discuss. And I think it's such an interesting, the beauty, if you think about, I think the Oncology Center of Excellence is kind of like the model of why this is great, right? The ability to address a critical public health need, right? Cancer affects 1 in 3 Americans at this point, I believe, is the statistic, right, can be a devastating diagnosis. And so having that focused attention and the resources to sustain that focus in a way that benefits medical products across the agency is I think one of the things that has contributed to our ability to take better care of patients with cancer. And I would argue, and I think few people would argue against me, that cancer is important, and I think children are at least as important as cancer, if not more so. And I think it's that sustained level of attention and focus to be able to think about all of the pieces, right? Like, are these the right regulatory mechanisms? Are these the right evidence generation requirements and guidelines? Are these the right rubrics that make sense for children that may or may not be the same way that we think about something that is for adults? Do we have the right regulatory pathways? Do we have the right set of requirements? Do we have the right regulatory science tools or medical device development tools, right? It's not just the pre-sub and the submission. It's everything else, the before and the after, right? The pipeline, to your point, right? It goes further back than just hitting submit or having that pre-sub meeting. It goes before and it goes after. And I think one of the things that I think the agency would be a huge boon to the agency in the way they think about this problem is thinking about it outside of just, it's not just, OHT4 or OHT7 or the Office for Special Populations, just OPD. It's how do you bring all of these efforts together in a concerted and synergistic way to ultimately address this challenge of bringing these meaningful and supportive products to market in a way that is sustainable on both sides of that, right? For the industry partners who are bringing those to the agency, but then also for those of us who are then using them to care for our patients.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about benefit or risk, because I think that's also very unique with this population. Because you're talking about FDA is supposed to protect and promote. And I think the promotional piece sometimes gets a little bit lost in the conversation. Mm-hmm. And where a lot of folks think of risk first when it comes to pediatrics, because they don't want to cause harm. They don't want to cause any more anguish for these parents that are dealing with, a sick child. So how do we get FDA and the various stakeholders to think a little bit more about the benefit versus the risk, especially if we're using adult devices on kids right now? And a lot of companies are like, I don't want to touch peds with a 10-foot pole because it's, maybe the money's not there, but also if we have a sick kid or a dead kid on our hands, that's it for our brand or that, so how do we get people thinking and maybe talking more about that part of the conversation?
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, right? And I agree, right? The protect and promote, the promote is just as important. It's an and.
Yeah.
And it's hard. Again, it goes back to that, our biological imperative to protect children.
Yes.
And I sometimes worry that in attempting to protect them, we're doing a different kind of harm of preventing solutions. I can speak to, at least, in my experience as a physician, but also as a researcher who has patients who enroll in clinical trials. For our families, especially for some of our families with our sickest kids, so my clinical specialty is pediatric complex care. So I focus on caring for children who have technology dependence, right? They might use tubes to breathe, tubes to feed. They might have oxygen requirements. They have, they have a home full of medical devices. And my experience has been with is that those families, they want innovation and they want to participate in research. They want to see new products. And, yes, there's some risk associated with that. But I think the willingness is there. And I think what we sometimes miss is the opportunity cost of not exploring it, right? It's, we think, well, this device is too risky. Well, what's the alternative? Is the alternative a significantly shortened lifespan? Is the alternative a lifelong debilitating illness or symptom or disability? And I think when we think about risk benefit, in a 70-year-old patient, you're thinking about, okay, well, how much, what is the expected, the life expectancy for a 70-year-old? In a 7-year-old, you've got decades ahead of time. And so there's also, I would say that the benefit should also be considered, like that exponential benefit, like solving a meaningful problem in a child is solving it for life. Like the health economics of that, the quality of life improvement of that is incredible. And I think could in many ways far outstrip the benefits of any calculus that you might do in a person, over the age of 60. So I think thinking about the benefits of that in that way, and also the risks in that way. I think, what I would say is I think families are more willing than we think they are. That's been my personal clinical and research experience, but also I think the literature bears that out. If you look at willingness of pediatric participants and their families to participate in research. And I think we, healthcare systems, healthcare researchers, children's hospitals, we are, raising our hands like, yes, we're here to be partners, because we sort of see both sides of it, right? We see the R&D side being the research partners, being the partners for the, the feasibility studies, the pivotal studies, and we are the ultimate, consumers, right? Right. Like we then want to use those devices, right? Like I do, like my research is in diabetes devices. Like, yes, I have, intellectual scientific curiosity about them and how we make them better and how we help people use them better in more meaningful ways. And I just want my patients to have better tools. So I think we are doubly invested in it.
Yeah. No, and everyone's sort of the stakeholder here, right? It really is like everyone's invested in this. I see a lot with, you touched on a lot of things where I've seen FDA initiatives like home as a healthcare hub, right? Like how do we get more devices into the home safely that can either help with monitoring, can help with, aid in diagnosis or trend analysis. Which I see as a huge benefit for pediatric populations, right? Especially, if you have a sick kid, you'd prefer they be at home, if you can help it, if you can bring them and have the comfort of their toys and their space. I see a lot with efforts and patient preference information in clinical studies and also patient-reported outcomes, which I feel like is perfectly suited for a lot of these clinical studies in pediatric populations. So
yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the health in the home, and I think so. Two things that I want to address. One is, yes, I think the FDA has come out with a number of really exciting new initiatives. There was the health in the home, rapid tempo. There's all these new programs to like focus and accelerate some different aspects of like gaps that we know are there. I think one thing that I sometimes don't always see is, and where is the pediatric lens on that problem?
Right.
And sometimes, especially for the programs that are often a partnership with CMS, they explicitly exclude children, right? Because they're for Medicare populations. So I think that's something that, like, I think the agency can continue to work on is how do we, when we have these fantastic ideas that are really critical and really important, how do we do them in a way that also includes children meaningfully? Which is happening, and it's sort of a, how do we do that everywhere? Right.
And not have it be an afterthought sometimes. Because sometimes it's like, we should now think about this. It's like, maybe this should have been an early conversation.
Yeah. And I, it's, so half of this is logistics and challenges and how do you do something and how do you get started? So the reality is it won't it is almost impossible that everything will be like, great, we're going to start every initiative pediatric first. It's, I'm not, I am aware of the complications. But it's like, how do we do that thoughtfully?
Yes.
Right. And how do we do it? But to the health at home piece, because I want to come back to that is, one of the things that we see is not only are there not enough, devices designed specifically for children, there's also just not enough that are designed specifically for the home setting, right? So we end up sending patients home with devices that were intended for hospitals, right? Our healthcare, the way that we care for patients advanced so much that we can prolong life, we can save people from otherwise catastrophic diseases or catastrophic events, and then they might require medical devices for quality of life, for activities of daily living. But we send them home with technologies that were meant for giant OSHA compliant hospital rooms to now use in their 2-bedroom apartment up 3 flights of stairs. One of my colleagues, Dr. Carolyn Foster, recently published a study on the kinds of just the sheer incompatibility sometimes of the devices that we give to families that they then use in their homes, and all of the modifications and changes that they have to do, that they have to improvise. We refer to they have to MacGyver things. Or, we saw, a family who had, the suction machine was entirely too loud and was keeping their baby up the whole time. So they put the suction machine in the basement and then drilled a hole through the floor and bought an extra long yonker. We had families who had modified their standards because the insurance would only provide a standard every so often, but it's a child, they're growing, they need a different standard. So they had done their own modifications to it to try to do it. So there's this entire space of we send patients home with devices that were never meant for the home. They don't fit. They're too big. They're too complex. And so in pediatrics, again, our incredible advances in the NICU, those kids now go home, G-tubes, trachs, vents, suction machines, racks of medications and of supplies.
Which is within the practice, that's what's interesting.
Yeah.
Within practice of medicine, right? You as a doctor, you're allowed to make these decisions about your patient and their health. But wouldn't it be nice if that was already kind of woven into the design of the product?
Into the design of the product. And right, because we send them home with the tools that we have. The tools we have are tools made for adults and tools made for hospitals. We don't yet have the tools for this is how to care for your child in your home. So I think that's a really important gap for us to fill. And I realize that the hospital at home initiative from the FDA is also thinking about how do we prevent hospitalizations, how do we care for people in their homes. And I think that that's just an important lens of, our homes are typically not ADA and OSHA compliant spaces with 3-foot wide, the right size hallways to accommodate these things. And those are real challenges for our families.
I mean, so one of the things that you've spoken about is, and when I've seen you present, is just how early is too early? Is there really too early in the phase of these conversations with companies?
It's a great question. I think there's no such thing. When we look at, formal guidance, from FDA, certainly there's been guidance documents on, consulting with, patient preference around outcomes, patient preference around trial design and trial studies. And those are all super important. But I think we can keep going earlier and earlier, right? I think, how are we facilitating partnerships and understanding what should even be built? And what is the form factor that should take, and why is that, right? The things that, you might learn in a biodesign course, right? Of what's the problem and how do you solve it? And is this the right solution? And involving patients as early as possible. I think patients want to be partners in that process. Again, particularly I'm thinking about the population that I help care for. Every single parent of a child who has a a suction machine and a ventilator at home has very specific opinions about how ventilators and suction machines should work and be designed and what features are important. And so how do you engage those parents, those families, those caregivers, in, hey, we have a 3-year R&D plan and these are the projects and these are the budgets, like thinking about it even then, like what's going into your pipeline. And I think that the PDCs and children's hospitals, I think we're uniquely positioned to be early partners in that and to facilitate that exchange because we care for those patients. We know who they are. We know what the technologies they need are. And, we can help. We also have, the skill sets for qualitative research, for interviews, for focus groups. So, it could be a great, how can we bring those distilled insights? And then, even one step before that is hearing from patients directly, like, where is the direction of innovation needed? And so, I'm always an advocate for, going to the patient to understand what we should build, how we should build it, why we should build it, and then you can go build it.
Yeah.
And I think that those questions can be answered early and often. And again, I think the willingness is there. That's what I hear from the families that we care for, that we do research. It's what I hear from my colleagues as well. So that's a message that I'd like to put out into the universe is, you have willing partners on multiple sides to facilitate that.
Yeah, and they're not too hard to find. Like I feel like there's an example that I can think of an introduction you made with a patient advocate who had a sick child at home, and she said, we're all on Facebook. We're all in these communities. Like there's groups of us and we all talk to each other and we all support each other. And they're ready to talk. They're ready to be listened to.
They are. I think people who experience medical needs, medical necessity, medical device use on a daily basis, they are dying for an opportunity to share those insights. Because they want to have the benefit for the family, for their child. B, they don't want other people to struggle on the way that they've struggled. It's a community that is very supportive and very open and is wants there to be this growth. And they're willing and able to participate in that.
Absolutely. Well, I want to be aware of your time. I wanted to ask the one question that I ask everybody who comes onto this podcast is there a med device or some sort of med tech that has personally improved your quality of life or changed your life in some way or the life of a loved one?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think for me, I'll give you a related answer. I've been very lucky to be relatively healthy. So I'll say the device that has changed my life the most are CGMs, continuous glucose monitors.
Really cool.
As a researcher, that's what I study. So for the last decade or so, I've spent my time working on understanding CGM interoperability, data standards, using CGM data for predictive algorithms, risk stratification, and then thinking about access and how do we make sure that everyone who needs a CGM can have a CGM and what are the implications of that from a policy perspective. And I've found it to be this kind of really lovely, like the diabetes research community has been this like wonderful, welcoming space for me. I'm a general pediatrician. I'm not an endocrinologist. So I always, whenever I give talks on the topic, that's my disclaimer. It's like, I just play an endocrinologist on TV. But it's been an incredibly welcoming community. I found really great partners on the industry side, all of the CGM manufacturers in, supporting, use of their data, providing access to their devices. I think, it's an interesting kind of small ecosystem, right? There are 4 cleared or approved CGMs in the United States. So it's a small group, but it's a massive disease, right? Yes. That impacts, right? If we think, type 1 diabetes is 2.5 million people in the US. But if you add type 2 and pre-diabetes, somewhere between up to a quarter and a third of the US population falls into that spectrum. And so it's incredible that the impact that like a relatively small tech community can have on such a huge sector of the population. And so it's been an incredible opportunity for me, both like from an academic productivity to like the friends and partnerships and collaborators that I've developed over the years, and the impact that I think those technologies have on the patients that we care for and the people in my personal life that I care for. So yeah, CGMs would be my
amazing. I love it. And I think, I mean, you're totally right. I think there's folks out there that think, oh, diabetes, we figured it out. Like we know there's stuff, there's devices for that, there's drugs for that. And then you read the news and there's horrible things that are still happening to folks that aren't getting the care or the, preventative tech that could help them live until, as you said, like it's the 7-year-old that we're also thinking about and hoping they live for another 100 years, right? So.
Yeah. I think there's no conversation about diabetes and devices more broadly that it can't include how do we make sure that the people who need them get them. Otherwise, we're not really solving the problem. But that's part of the journey, right? That's part of the coalition that can help make this happen, right? It's the FDA and its industry and its patients and patient advocacy groups and its researchers and its clinicians and its policymakers. I guess it's sort of, kind of bringing us full circle.
It's like the perfect example. You're right. I'm like,
it's it's a big tent. Pediatrics is a big tent and everybody's welcome because we're only going to solve this problem together.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I think we could just mic drop right there. That was like, that's. Thank you so much for joining me. And again, thank you for all you're doing in this space. I am so happy to always run into you at conferences and appreciate your advocacy.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all of your support. You've been so helpful to so many of the companies that CTIP has supported over the years. So we're always delighted to have the opportunity to work with you and to see you as often as I can.
Thank you. Awesome. Thanks again.
Of course. Thank you.